Welcome to Cars on Call. I am Steve Schutz, automotive journalist, gastroenterologist. This time joined by trauma surgeon Stefan Moran and automotive connoisseur, collector, historian Adams Hudson. I said this time because I actually recorded another show, just myself and our very special guest Joe Bezzetta. So I'm going to plug that because it was a really good conversation. A kind of a deep dive into a bunch of areas of automotive that I think everyone's going to like. And we have a very special guest today. Adam says we'll introduce her soon, but you can see her on the screen. Adam, just say who she is because she's going to be on the air.
Well, she is a very special guest. This is Katie Gatti. She is a personal finance journalist, better known as Money with Katie, and that's Katie, to save you from the other 14 ways that could be spelled. But Money with Katie, all over the internet, and she presently has a huge audience of fans, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about money and cars. This could be the first episode of Cars with Katie. We don't know, but we look forward to when we introduce you for real.
Oh,
just saying, she looks like a real pro, man. She's got that microphone hanging from the air, and here I am, some earbuds. Steve-O's got over the ears, and you're sitting in the garage, Adam. So I think we better get prepared here, guys.
Well, we're going to go through some automotive anniversaries that are that applied this year. There's one from 1953, one from 1983, and one from 1993, and we're going to go through them. They're pretty cool, actually, and I'm psyched about that. Before we get to that, guys, I know Adams is going to do a car spotting, but I spotted a GR Corolla. It's the first one I've actually seen in the wild.
What?
Yeah. Did it look like a $78,000 car? No.
I didn't know people let them out of the garage. What was that about?
Yeah, it looks like a damn Corolla. Somebody wrote, I think on Twitter, they said, I can't believe that this GR Corolla is only $6,000. I mean, this is MSRP, $6,000 cheaper than a Supra.
I guess people buy them. What did we discover that they're going to make like 300 of them? Is that the deal? 2,500
are being imported. 300 of the Maurizio.
Oh, that's
the one that's the one that's going for so much money.
Yep.
And then there's a little bit of a correction because last week, guys, we talked about the Challenger and Charger going away. And I read that they are going away and they're going to stop production end of July, which is basically tomorrow. And that's false. They stopped taking orders, but they're going to continue to produce it through the end of the year. Stefan, you were talking about maybe that was just, or I think you said they should just stop taking orders. They shouldn't stop production. So in fact, what you said they should do is what they're doing. By the way, they sold about 70,000 of Challenger plus Charger the first 6 months of this year. That's about the same as Acura sold all vehicles. They're both selling very well.
Sad. Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, we talked about this is the last of the big hurrah for the internal combustion engine. And, I'm going all out on my Cobra build, total analog internal combustion engine. And for somebody that wants something new, to remember the heyday of the automotive industry and gas guzzlers with monster power, this is the perfect opportunity to buy one of those because that will go away. That and the Mustang Dark Horse, that's it. After this, there's not going to be that anymore.
Well, it's a bit of a speculator's dream come true. And Steve, I'm glad when you said you had a bit of a correction. It almost sounded like you'd said we'd made a mistake, which of course could not be, because what we read was they were going away. But if they're just stopping orders, now, of course, that means that the pipeline is severely constricted and there will be an end to this. But there are going to be a lot of people putting these cars in mothballs and rolling them out in about 10 years at some hugely inflated price.
Hey, we're all going to miss the Charger and Challenger. The three of us love them. Katie, you're a millennial, I guess. Is it even on your radar screen?
Not at all.
I had a feeling.
Well, I don't think a sweet little Tri-Delt from Alabama would be appreciating a nasty Challenger or Charger on the road with a wide body.
You know who drove the Challengers and Chargers at Alabama were the football players. They'd all come to town, and anytime you saw like a tricked out Challenger or Charger, it was almost always a football player.
Okay.
That makes perfect sense. Now, you're saying that doing a burnout was not part of the initiation at the Trident House?
Yeah, it's not super on brand for me. I don't think. I fear.
Oh.
Well, we're going to actually segue from those vehicles to something really old. So 70 years ago, the Chevy Corvette was born. We were all, just for Katie, we were all, I think, in high school when that happened. Adams, talk about the Corvette.
We weren't in high school in 1953. What?
That's a joke, Adams. By the way,
my parents,
millennials will believe that.
Yeah, I like how you said we're going to transition to something old, and then I'm up next. But anyway, in 1953, and take a look at that car, folks, because it is kind of hard to believe that lovely little bubble, the bubbled envelope of that design, which is credited to Harley Earl, who obviously became later way more flamboyant. But that was Chevrolet's first crack at the Corvette right there, and you can see, Steph, thank you for getting those images up. But you can tell that it was designed with some restraint, which we'll come back to the opposite of that later when we discuss the car spotting. But that car is obviously, it's a fiberglass car. Underneath the hood is a little inline 6-cylinder. Yes, boys and girls, not every Corvette had a V8 under its hood, about 150 horsepower to, 245 cubic inches, something like that, probably somewhere in the 4-liter range. But I mean, just look at that design. I mean, he was Harley Earl was greatly enamored with the European sports cars, and you can tell there's a little bit of Austin Healey in the front. There's a little bit of Ferrari egg crate grill going on there. It's not yet an egg crate; it became that later, and it's just a handsome car. They sold a whopping 300 of those, or the very same as the Toyota Maurizio edition. And I mean, you just look at that thing. It's just the feel good 50s right there in your face. And that car got better and better and better. And of course, it had some up and down years all throughout the 70s. But there you go. There's the Genesis car right there.
Here's what I'd tell you is, the 50s are long forgotten in the automotive collector world. The 55 Chevy, the 56 Chevy, the one that we saw 30 years ago, every car show. I mean, you don't see them anymore, but these C1 Corvettes, to me, it's a big 50 design. It's got the wings on the back. It's got the multiple colors in the cockpit. I absolutely love these early C1 Corvettes. I just think they're very cool. I think it's a timeless design. Not as cool as a Cobra, which was about 8 years later, but I do like these C1 Corvettes.
I think that
Stephen, since you were in high school when this thing came out, tell us about
it. Actually, I'll be honest, it was junior high. But anyway, yeah, I love the design of the first Corvette. It's very Futurama, but I think it had a 3-speed transmission. It was very underpowered. So I think the Corvette peaked with the second generation. I think the third generation was pretty good at the beginning, and then it got bad. And then all Corvettes after that, I think, didn't quite measure up.
Well, the Corvette's kind of the epitome. It doesn't matter what it's how good you look doing it. I mean, it's underpowered, 3 horsepower, had nothing to compete with out of England or Italy. But, it kind of fit that American boardwalk cruiser, just going down the road, going to the sock hop, going to get some ice cream, to drive in. But you weren't going to see that thing racing on a weekend, unlike the Austin Healey's, the Jaguars, and Ferraris.
Yeah, they later came into their own, and we may be spending a trifle too long. I mean, we could just talk about the Corvette world an entire episode. But Zora Arcus Duntov brought us all the performance that even Europeans could handle. And Steve, you're right; they sort of fell off a cliff somewhere in the mid 70s or early 70s. But I do love the purity of that early one. Before
we move on, Katie, thumbs up or thumbs down?
I think Corvettes are cute.
This one, this one right here this very early 1950 ones.
Yeah, I actually think I prefer the 50s version to the current version.
Okay, all right, there we go, listeners. Take a look. Hey, listeners.
Nicely said.
Think about that.
It's
So
bubbly and flamboyant, like you said.
So
I'm
think
into
about
it.
that from an investment standpoint. Her generation, there will be people in her generation that never even knew about these cars who will see these at auction, and these things will maintain their value because of, that's all it takes right there. Somebody says, "Yeah, I like that. That's cool." Sure, 55 Chevy. She'd be like, "I don't think so."
That was a good question, Steph. All right, let's see. And then we turn to Steve. I'm curious why you picked the next one.
I think he is having technical difficulties. He sent me a text. He can't hear anything, and I don't see him on the Zoom. I wonder if he's still recording.
Should we just pretend that
he's out?
There he went.
And it says, "I am the host now."
But... Oh, well, I'd like to introduce our host, Stefan Loren, who is the new leader of Cars on Call.
All right, so we'll have to see if hopefully he will jump back in.
Well, let's proceed with this because it's your turn with the Ford Thunderbird of 1983, and actually only Steve knows why he chose that one.
I really he sent me this one, and I'm like thinking to myself, I'm not so quite sure why, but I guess he's picking a 30-year, 40-year anniversary. But this car was a pretty big deal. I'm going to pull it up here. So listeners, I'm showing you a 1983 Ford Thunderbird. And so before this, the Thunderbird had become this.
Wait, oh man, can I go ahead and vote? Can I just do a thumbs down? What in the world was, well.
Okay, just hold on, man.
I can't contain myself.
So before this, the Thunderbird was this big, ugly, boxy Luxo barge, classic American, late 70s, 80s. And then sales markedly dropped. So Ford came out with this new rounded Thunderbird. And dude, come on, you're old enough. This actually was pretty cool when it came out. It was a new design. Think who copied this? Lexus SC, okay? You take this, and it's the Lexus SC 10 years later. Well, Ford, the cool thing about this, it was built on the Fox platform, which is the same as the Mustang. And then they came out with the Turbo Coupe. That was their top-of-the-line model. It had the turbocharged SVO engine, the same thing as in the Mustang. It had a manual transmission. It had all kind of handling things, and sales were actually pretty good. Now, it did have a whole whopping, I think, 145 horsepower, 180 of torque. It was a little bit slower than the V8 0 to 60 because of the torque issue, but the Turbo Coupe,
standard car or in the SC? You mean the high output car only had 140 horse?
That was the Turbo Coupe was 145 horsepower and 180 of torque.
Okay.
The V8 had 140 horsepower, 250 of torque. These were the first years. They went up in the next couple of years. So here you can see it. I mean, it had the Marshall headlights, driving lights on it, and it had the little hood scoops. And I mean, it was pretty cool. It was Motor Trend Car of the Year 1987. But hey, Adams, you're gonna like this one. Here's the best one.
I tell you, oh well, actually, I tell you, I'm gonna calm down my repulsion at that first photo, because from the front, that is actually a pretty good design, with the SC. And I thought SC stood for supercharged, not turbocharged. I could be wrong. But that is a very aero look. And man, you can see the future Mustangs in that design.
So and the Ford Thunderbird actually was more aerodynamic than the Mustang. The Fox body Mustang was basically a box on 4 wheels. But this actually was very aerodynamic. But my favorite, it had I'm going to pump you up. So for Arnold Schwarzenegger, so this actually, listeners, I'm showing a picture of a little bulb, and this is where you could pump up your lumbar support.
You'd better tell them what that is. Okay.
I want to pump you up, but my favorite was they had the Bjorn Fila edition. Let's check out those short shorts, Katie. I'm sure that gives you shivers. But this is Bjorn Borg, was a very famous tennis player with John McEnroe and Jimmy Connors. The three of them were constantly battling it out. Then Andre Agassi came up later, but they had the Fila edition. And yes, I had Fila tennis shorts and a Fila shirt back in the day. But, this is when they had the Cartier edition of a car and all these fancy editions. But yeah, the Ford Thunderbird Fila edition. So.
Well, the Thunderbird went through so many iterations, of course, launching initially as a bit of a Corvette competitor, as we saw, back in 55, 67, they were a two-seater car. And then they just got big and bulky and fatter and more luxurious and, just became like, I don't know what they were. They just took that nameplate and just stretched it out into some huge, like half limousine. I guess by 83, and now I do see the wisdom of Steve's choice, is that's when they trimmed them back down.
Yes, they trimmed them back down.
Reinvented it.
Yep. All right. Since our host is not here, let's see. What was the next? I got to pull up the. Bear with us, listeners. Here, let me pull up the next one. So this was Steve-O's section, that the Dodge Ram. Why don't we just skip that till he comes back on? We'll move on. Let's do safety real quick.
Let's do Dodge Ram. If there was ever an automotive oxymoron, there it is. Okay. All right. Hit it.
All right. So we're going to move on, listeners. And let me pull back up here. I don't have screen sharing anymore. Sorry. I'm hosting and talking and managing my computer. So Steve-O brought up a good point, and he said, this whole COVID thing and shrinking police forces, defunding the police, did that affect automotive safety in any way? And I'm like, Steve, I'm sure you're absolutely right. Because I know if I drive the same road and I ain't ever seen a cop, I just haul ass more and more each time on that road. But so I said, you got, not really listeners, but on occasion, maybe,
But truthfully, it's a conditioned response. I mean, yeah.
It is a conditioned response. And it's part of that muscle memory, you never see a cop. So anyway, I looked it up. So speeding related fatalities increased by 8%, up to total 29% of all fatalities from 2020 to 21. So a big, 8% is a big increase. In the state with the highest fatality rate with speeding, you'd never guess. I was really surprised.
Let me think. See, I the first thing that popped to mind would be some hugely populated state like California, but I guess amid 6 lanes of traffic moving at a crawl, maybe not. I don't know. What's the state?
South Carolina at 46% of all fatalities are speed related.
That wouldn't have made my top 10 guesses. That's unbelievable.
It must be. Yeah, I was like completely surprised. I guess those Clemsons. I don't know. Maybe it's Clemson grass.
Clemson people. Blame it on them.
We're in Alabama. We're not real big fans. And now you live in the state with the lowest, and there's no doubt about that. All the silver hairs down there, retarees driving around. Yeah.
So
9%.
They're going 32 miles an hour with their blinker on.
Yeah.
All the time.
Welcome. Move to Florida to come and die. So 9%. That's it for Florida. So I looked it up, and I did find a couple articles, but one was from the National Police Association. So of course it's going to be a little bit biased, but they did look at it, and they noticed some things. Auto insurance rates have gone up because they've noticed that people are speeding more, and the insurance industry is always well ahead of this. They're looking at the numbers every day to figure out what they need to do to ameliorate their costs going out. Then we had the pandemic. So you think about it, when you're driving during the pandemic, there was nobody on the road. You had the road to yourself. And of course, the Cannonball record was reset during the pandemic. I did not
know that. Really?
Yes, they reset it. Average speed was just ridiculous. I can't remember. So think about it. You drove during the pandemic. I flew during the pandemic because I had to go to work. There's nobody on airplanes. There's nobody on the roads. So if there's no cops didn't want to pull you over, they didn't want to get COVID. Or if you did get pulled over by a cop, you start going, I got COVID, I'm going to the doctor. He's like, you just go. So you can imagine that.
Wait, you're our safety expert. How did you get that job?
You get pulled over, and you during the pandemic, you ripped off your mask and you start hacking. You roll down the window and you slobber, and he's like, "Stay away!" You just leave,
But actually, you're saying that trend has really continued. That just the sort of people got used to speeding.
Yes, exactly. People got used to speeding, being no one on the highway, no one on, not having to share the road with people, and those bad habits have persisted. And that's been seen across the country, that speed is up. We talk about pedestrian fatalities on this show. Pedestrian, and my favorite word, petacyclist death rates have markedly increased. So Katie, a petacyclist, that's how it's referred to in the literature, is pedestrians and cyclists, including motorcyclists. So you put that group together, it's called peda-cyclist, PDA.
I'm surprised though that is the case statistically, because I would think with so many people still working from home that you would have fewer people commuting still post-pandemic. So I would think there'd still be fewer people on the roads.
They do, but when they get on the road, it's like Fast and Furious.
Bat out of hell. Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe.
So that really would mean, no, Katie brings up a fantastic point, because that really would mean if there's fewer people on the road, yet, what do you say, speeding related fatalities gone up 8%, it means that the incident rate per 100,000 has gone up.
Yes, right. That's the incident rate. So it's gone up. So, and now that law enforcement agencies have this new thing, what they call people super speeders, where they got people out there doing 100 miles an hour, 105 miles an hour. They said they have not seen the number of people doing this as they had in the past. So the fatality rate went up. We've seen that happen post-pandemic, market increase in fatality rate. And it's higher than it was pre-pandemic as well. So a lot going on there, driver behavior. So, and it goes back to you remember the old broken windows theory, that if the police can manage kids breaking windows to small petty crimes, that then translates downstream that you have fewer large scale crimes. So if you don't have the police out there because they've got decreased funding, decreased numbers of police doing basic stops for speeding, for rolling through a four-way stop, that then exacerbates the behavior behind the wheel. And there actually was, Austin, Texas looked at this. They cut about a third of the police budget, and their response time with 911 went up 30%. And there had a markedly significant increase in fatalities and injuries afterwards. So, and they said the average speed limit had increased to 15 over posted. So it does exist.
Wow. And that the age old sort of, not really a rule of thumb, but what you would hear is that a policeman would probably on the interstate look the other way at 10 miles an hour over, that you felt like if it said 70, you could go 78, set your cruise on 78, you were pretty good, if you go 78 on the interstate now, you're getting past all day long.
Yes, absolutely. It's amazing to me how fast people are going.
It is. The car capability is certainly gone up as well. We won't dwell on this. We won't just drag this, too deep into the weeds. But sometimes we talk about these hot rods of the 70s, how fast they were. They would top out at 110 miles an hour. They'd get to 60 and nothing and melt the tires off, but they weren't big top speeders. And now you've got, normal cars will do 140.
All right. Well, since I'm the new host here, Steve, you lost your job. I'm the new host here. We're going to move on to our guest. Super excited to have Katie on here. And Adams, I'm going to let you do the introduction. And, here we are, a bunch of old guys trying to be new age techno into doing media, and it's been a slog for us. And I see Katie.
Great. You're doing great.
I see Katie here with her wonderful microphone in her little home studio, and Adam's introduced our guest.
And she's laughing at our prehistoric capabilities. Yeah. Katie, I tried to fax my request to you several times. It wouldn't go through. Anyway.
Wait, can I tell you, I was just in New York at the BlackRock headquarters doing a lunch and learn there. And the gal showing me around, she was 24. And we were in the little BlackRock museum, and there was a floppy disk on the wall. And I jokingly said, "Oh, I bet you don't know what that is." And she goes, "It looks like the save icon." I said,
"Oh, there it is."
She had no idea. I'm 28. So it's not like, she's that much younger than me, but even in that little, window of time, that's how quick technology moves. She missed it entirely.
That is fantastic. The save icon.
I was like, oh, this is the first time I feel old, guys. What?
Well, normally our real host or our former host, I should say.
He's fired.
Before he lost his job just minutes ago. He and Stepan are actually both pretty IT adept. Unlike me, I just sort of I just do whatever shows up. But to reintroduce our distinguished guest, who this is going to be just like being at the BlackRock Symposium. It's just like it, isn't it? But Katie, as I had mentioned, is a personal finance journalist, and it's Money with Katie. And I first sort of discovered her through a marketing e-zine, a marketing newsletter called Morning Brew. That's morningbrew.com, where she is often a columnist there, and she has a special link to her blog and her podcast on Morning Brew. Morning Brew is, Katie, you can correct me on this, somewhere in the vicinity of about 4 million subscribers. It's probably
That's correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
and it is just incredibly
4 million.
4 million, and it is
Wow.
it is wittily informative. It's funny, it's interesting, it's fast paced. You don't get bogged down too far. There are links to things if you want to go a little bit deeper. And Katie's writing fits ideally in that. Katie is a fantastic
thank you.
writer. Let me tell you, I'm not just saying it because you're here or agreed to come, but you are a fantastic writer, an excellent communicator, and her expertise, of course, is in the personal finance realm, where, if you can see in the background there, almost not opposite, it fits within her theories of saving, of doing well, of setting goals. She's very disciplined and frugal in her advice that she gives to up and coming, mostly millennials, plus or minus the age group. Of course, I fit way outside that circle, but I do love her writing and her communication. So when she recently did a post about having recently purchased the Porsche Macan that you see in the background there, she defended and supported it enough. I mean, her car choice endeared her to us, and it also allowed her to be on this show to help us defend and rationalize our car purchases to our spouses. So with that, Katie, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. What a glowing introduction. I appreciate it.
I try my best to go. You're an easy one to glow over. Well, okay, since you recently purchased that to what a lot of people would call a dream car, and it's certainly an aspirational vehicle, when I was reading that, I heard you talk about the numbers and the justification, and of course, that is your expertise. But the thing that touched us and why I shared your post is that the car and the purchase kind of ended up meaning a little bit more to you than just having gotten there, the hood badge and the payments. Can you sort of elaborate on that a little?
Sure. So we can get into the backstory on why I like these cars, but I had always set this as a kind of reach goal for myself, that someday, if I'm able to check these boxes and accomplish these things, that I will buy myself one of these. And I didn't ever envision that happening on the timeline that it did. So I think, as a personal finance writer, there are these implicit ideas about what's a good value to have with your money and what's a bad value to have. So you'll often hear people preach about values-based spending and, you should only spend money on the things that you value. Well, cars are almost always going to fall into the latter category. Even if you personally are into them, they're kind of treated with this blanket tisk of like, oh, that's, you're only going to buy a luxury vehicle to impress other people. Only irresponsible people spend a lot of money on cars, or financially illiterate people, because they must not understand what a terrible investment they are. So you hear a lot of that rhetoric in the personal finance world. But for me, I was like, well, I really want one of these things.
How can I rationalize this?
Yeah,
purchase?
I'm like, I can afford it, so I'm gonna buy it. But I think that there was also a component of this that, it's been a while since I've owned a vehicle at all. I used to have an Audi A3, and I sold it during the pandemic because we were moving to a very bikeable city, and I didn't quite anticipate ahead of time how spending this much on a car, and also having a car that was so meaningful to me, how it was going to elevate my level of just baseline anxiety. So I'm like, oh my gosh, am I parking next to somebody that person looks suspicious, like they're going to swing that door open with reckless abandon, and I don't want to be anywhere in the vicinity of them? Or is this rattling noise in the cabin normal? Oh my God, I hope I didn't hurt the car. I hope the engine's not too hot. Like if someone gets in the car and they have dirty shoes on, I'm like, no, I'm forcibly taking your shoes off of you. So, sometimes I wish I could just park it in the garage and stare at it and then drive it around in a bubble, but it is.
If a friend does that 3 times in a row, they're no longer
a friend. That's right. Done. So I also think it's funny. It is kind of a joke, I think, amongst Porsche owners that the Macan, especially the base model Macan, is not a real Porsche. It's like the poor man's Porsche. But you have to remember, I'm upgrading from a bike. So the criticism that, it doesn't accelerate as quickly, or it doesn't have the same bravado as, it's like, well, I was driving a fixed single speed bike before. So this is quite the upgrade for me.
Well, it certainly makes the cut of a real Porsche. I don't know who told you that, but they are misinformed.
Oh, good. Well, that makes me happy.
Well, Lee, since you're such a lovely young lady, I won't refer to one of the other Porsches that I beat on this show that you fortunately did not purchase. But
I'm so curious which one.
You didn't purchase it. That's an R-rated series.
That's a different series. But so you talked about buying this vehicle, and you're in finances. You do financial advice, and I think we need to go back to that, because I've kind of grew up a little bit, not Dave Ramsey, but you buy what you can afford,
right?
Underbuy your home, underbuy your vehicles,
and
only buy. I've never had credit card debt in my entire life. It's paid to zero every month. When I buy a car, typically they say, well, if you finance, they'll give you $500 off. So I finance it, then I typically pay it off within a year, or I use the equity line to pay it off. But I think the trap that a lot of people get into is when they rationalize these purchases. I deserve it. I work hard.
Right.
I need this nice car. It's an investment. No, it's a depreciating asset. It is not an investment.
It's a beautiful liability.
Exactly. And so talk a little bit about, now you can go up to an 8-year loan on a vehicle. That's a mortgage.
It's crazy.
Insanity.
It is.
So what's your advice to somebody who wants to purchase a car? You can be like my daughter and come to dad and say, hey, would you give me a 0% loan? Okay. But
it's my favorite bank, the bank of dad.
Yeah. So expand a little bit on that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too in this interest rate environment, because I actually think if it were 2020 and you could still get a 2% car note, I'd be like, who cares? Get a 50-year loan. Like, it's basically free money, but not anymore. Right. But I think there are a few different benchmarks, but rather than fixating on the monthly cost and trying to stretch out the payments as far as possible to lower your monthly burden, I think most people would be better served by looking at their total cost of ownership just based on each rate and term. So, for example, I'm signing a publishing contract later this month, of which, to your point about paying off the car right away, I'm going to take the first portion of this advance and just pay this off in full. So I financed it at first because I wanted to wait to use this specific money to pay for it, so I didn't have to sell any positions that are in the stock market or like liquidate a full savings account. But the rates right now are just crazy. So I got a 7.99%, just obscene.
Ooh, yeah.
And I did the 72 months. I was like, well, whatever, I'm going to pay it off in a month or two anyway. So I know it's not going to really impact me. But the total cost of ownership over those 6 years wouldn't have been the purchase price of $58,995. It would have been about $84,000. And that's obscene. If I wanted to pay $80,000 for a Porsche, I would have gotten the Cayenne. So it can be tempting. And I think plugging things into the amortization calculator can quickly reorient you and reveal why that is not wise. And I think, at the risk of sounding harsh, and I certainly don't want to generalize, but if you can't afford a vehicle without feeling strapped on a 36 or 48 month term, you probably can't afford it yet, which isn't necessarily a knock on you as an individual. But if the rate is 8%, like that's going to make it tough for everybody. And we can get into why things are trending up and why payments are so high and why vehicles are so expensive right now. But you do have to, I think, be more conservative. We're all having to get away from that kind of the era of easy money, the decade where it felt like, oh, inflation's non-existent, interest rates are zero. How is this happening? We don't know, but it's great. It's like we're not really in that era anymore. And so I think people are having to, reconfigure for themselves what is actually reasonable. And so I generally tell people they want all of their transportation related costs to be less than 10% of their take home pay every month. So that's inclusive of insurance, the payments, the maintenance, the gas. And as far as purchase price, probably no more than 25 to 30% of gross annual income, but that doesn't scale very well. Like that could mean a 6-figure vehicle purchase if you have a high household income, which probably doesn't actually make sense for most people. And I think the last piece that I would consider is not just current income, but where are you with your other savings and investment goals? That makes a huge difference. If your kids are out of college and you are already basically fully funded for retirement, well, okay, then splurge, right? But if I make $350,000 per year at 30 years old, and I might feel justified in buying a $90,000 vehicle, but if my total net worth is only $100,000 and I got 2 kids in daycare, well, now that doesn't really look so reasonable. So I think that broader financial context of like, where are you in your financial life? How set is your future already? And how much is the car going to detract from that? That I think is a really, really big piece that we don't often talk about.
And I think that's a big concern for me. Sorry, the big concern.
No. I'm just like, I think me and you want to focus on the word splurge in just a moment, but go with
but I want to go back to one thing, because I've always found that this has been a very important issue for people purchasing a vehicle. Is a lot of people do live month to month and they look at what is my monthly outflow. So all they care about is the payment. The problem is you start getting past a 4-year loan on most vehicles, you're going to become upside down. And what that means, listeners, is that if you crash that car and total it, your insurance is going to give you less money for the car than what you owe on it, unless you've got, I can't remember what they call it. I've never done it, but I know there's some kind of gap insurance or something they call it. So for listeners, and you go to 8-year loan on a vehicle, oh my God, I can't even imagine that, that you could be talk about turning your financial world upside down. Is having an 8-year loan, crashing it at the 3-year point. You don't have gap or bridge, and now you owe more.
Well, I know several people that has happened to, and there's, as far as I know, there's really no good answer. It's kind of like, well, you're going to have to find a way to pay it. And now they need a new car. They need a different vehicle because the one that they have is now totaled, right? And they have to pay off that loan with whatever they can. But it becomes a mess. But that's a really good point too about the term. The further you extend the term, the more you are creating some risk for yourself that could happen.
As I look at this, it's almost like there's a confluence of things that we actually saw during the pandemic. And first of all, is that never in my lifetime have I seen cars outside of a very collectible, almost like an instant collectible type of car, bring more than MSRP, bring more than what the window sticker said. And then we had that because, the supply chain and all the chip manufacturing, all that business led to reduced supply. So you had retail plus. Then you had pandemic money given to people. Then you had next to free interest rates. And so people went, hey, why not? And like you rationalized, because you do have the book signing deal. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
Most people would not have that in their near immediate future, that they say, hey, I'm just going to pay this thing off. So they're paying more than what the car was worth on the day they bought it. I mean, more than the manufacturer said the car would have been worth, because dealers, to a degree, had to mark it up. Then they had free money that wound up, being spent. And now you've got what is either an 84, 96, whatever it is, month car loan. If they put the minimum down on that day, and this is a long point, but I think it's true because it's leading to a big bubble of negative equity in that age group. You're upside down the entire time you own it. And Katie, I don't know where your numbers would fall on this, but back in my day, it used to be sort of like if you can't put 20% down on a car, you're going to be living upside down, because a car might be worth on the used car market in 60 months about 50% of its original MSRP in a general way. And those lines cross at about that spot. So that was a long thing to say. What do you feel about this coming potential tsunami of people who can't finish their payments? Are we going to be looking at the 2008 financial crisis in the car world?
Yeah, well, I looked into this, and I do follow this guy on Twitter named Car Dealership Guy. He's got a huge following, and I think he was calling earlier this year for a bit of a meltdown of defaults to come. So who knows? There might be. I haven't actually dug into the data myself, but to your point about the confluence of factors, I think it really is a perfect storm. I don't think it's just people kind of sheerly living beyond their means by choice. I think that there is some of this where, number one, it seems like vehicle manufacturers are producing fewer of those bare bones base models and more of the more expensive, well-equipped options. So it's harder to find the cheaper vehicle, which creates that negative feedback loop, because even if you can find a cheap one, the demand for the cheap one is so high that it pushes the price up. You've also got inflation at play, the same way everything else has become more expensive. I also think we're still seeing the supply chain and chip shortage issues happening. Like, we're still getting kind of the long tail of that. And then with interest rates higher, it's just more expensive to borrow money. So the last time I bought a car was in, I guess, I think it was actually February 2020. It was right before everything kind of closed down. And I don't even remember. I think I put 20% down, but my rate was it was like 2%, that I remember kind of being like, well, I don't know if I want to tie up a ton of cash in this vehicle, because the price to borrow is so cheap. That's just not the case anymore. So it wouldn't surprise me if we saw a softening, but I don't know, as someone that just bought a car and felt like I paid a bit of a premium for it, I'm selfishly hoping there isn't one, because I know I'm going to be pissed if in 6 months from now the car is worth a lot less. But I guess it doesn't really matter. You can't always time those things. If you need to get a car, you need to get a car.
You extract your value in the use.
Hey, I got a question for you, Katie. So, this was an emotional purchase. I got a 2 question for you. So you bought a Porsche. That's really damn cool at your age. I was still driving, I think, a Chevy Vega. So, you're clearly a closet enthusiast. So what's your earliest car memory that you kind of got a little bit of bug? Because a Porsche, that's really cool.
Yeah.
And then as the safety person on this show, I've got to ask you, was this an emotional purchase, or did you look at the safety ratings on this vehicle as well prior to purchase?
Well, I'll answer the first part of the question first, which is that my earliest distinct car memory is of my friend's dad getting a 911.
Oh,
and
yeah.
There you go.
Her parents had just gotten divorced, and her mom,
because of the Porsche, probably. Yeah.
The Porsche came second, but her mom had remarried a guy who had a Boxster, and her dad would be like,
ding, ding, ding,
ding, ding, ding.
Yeah. She wins the recall of the car we picked on. Go ahead.
Her dad would be like, well, he's got the cheap Porsche. That's not real. I have the real Porsche, because he had the 911 Carrera, whatever. It was just a what measuring contest between them. It was just funny.
Yes, that's why it's called what it is.
They were probably the only 2 people I knew that owned Porsches, and her mom had been married to both of them. But anyway, he would drive us around on like the back roads in Kentucky where I grew up, and I think it might have been the only model at the time that had a back seat. I just seem to remember this, like it was like a big deal that there was a back seat, and the top was down. We'd playing Bruce Springsteen just for hours, and we'd go through the tunnels so we could like hear the engine. And I just remember it was like such a big deal that he got this car. We literally took pictures in it, like me at 10 years old, like sitting on the back of it. So that might have been when the interest started. And then I remember it was really solidified when on Keeping Up with the Kardashians, Kourtney Kardashian got like the first Cayenne. And so when the Macan came out, I was like, yep, that's the goal. Like, that's the car. At some point in my life, I have to get one of those. So that probably is pretty revelatory from the sense that, yes, it was an emotional, like, no, I just want it purchase. I didn't really look into the practical things all that much, but was pleasantly surprised with the justification rationale that I stumbled into my confirmation bias that I should get the car. Because as I got more serious about buying it, I found that I think Porsches in general, Macan specifically, have really improved reliability and safety over the years. I looked into the like JD Power just to compare it to like the Mazda CX-5, which is what I would consider to be more of a like stereotypically reliable small SUV, kind of in the same class, but not luxury. And they were really comparably ranked. So I don't know. My dad also, he's really into cars, and he was like, oh no, these are, he did more research than I did when I told him I wanted to get one. He's sending me things, every single day. But I think, let's be real, like, does anyone buy a luxury German sports car because they're looking at safety ratings? Probably not. It's probably almost always purely like an emotional choice, but I don't know. I think that's okay. I think that's part of life sometimes. So maybe that's
it's got
just
a 5-star rating on the European site. They haven't been, the latest ones have been crashed in America with testing, but it is a 5-star rating in Europe. So
good. Well, see, learn something new every day. See, that's what I was just seeking out information that would further justify the decision that I had already made. And I was happy when
I spent way too many years in marketing. We used to always sort of come back to that. People buy emotionally, but they rationalize logically. So if you end up going into the numbers and the crash ratings and all these other things, I mean, that's fine. That's a very good logical way to sort of deduce that, oh no, this is the right car, and I researched it because. By the way, your friend's dad was right. The 911 is superior. So yes,
well, it's certainly more expensive, so I would assume so.
Adams, you're talking about rationalization, and that goes back. One of my favorite quotes is, "Don't confuse me with the numbers. I've already made up my mind."
Right.
That's
exactly.
Well, I got another. You got a question?
I was actually looking at yours, Steph. So you go with that. I can see this one coming, and I'm curious about it too.
So this is the one, and that I had a question. Living in the social media world can be brutal, and I basically do Instagram or throw some pictures up, but I don't do Twitter and leave comments. But did you get some like what the hell comments when you Miss Financial Responsibility purchased a Porsche Macan? I mean, this is like David Ramsey buying a Rolls Royce. It's just, I can see the comments.
In an island. Yeah.
Yes. I can see his own private Idaho. Did you get some nasty grams?
Well, first of all, the Dave Ramsey comparison's funny because he's like a centimillionaire. Like, him buying a Rolls Royce would be like the average person buying like a little red wagon. So even that technically shouldn't inspire any hate, but not as much as you'd think. And I think it's probably because I have been talking about this for a long time, like years. And I've kind of always put it out there that this is my dream car. And if I ever, exceed this net worth and income, I'm going to do it. And so I think a lot of people were happy for me, but I did contend with some people that were either skeptical or disagreed or would say, oh, this makes me like you less. I said, well, that's fine. Like, I have the way I added the blog post about it was like, I'll be sad about that in sport mode. Thank you. It's okay.
That's how you ended that article. That was beautiful.
Yeah. I was like, well, it's not your money, so it doesn't really matter. It is one of those things though, where like I receive constructive criticism and just general criticism pretty frequently, because a lot of my stuff is fairly opinionated and it has a specific point of view, which is why when Adams reached out and he was so like, oh, this is great, you deserve it, I was like, let's be friends. I'm like, this is the rare nice email that I have about this purchase, so you and I are going to be buddies. But I think that on the financial responsibility piece, I used to really subscribe pretty heavily to that, as frugal as possible money mindset, and that anyone who owned nice things must be trying to impress other people. They must not understand the magic of, compounding returns. But what I really came to realize is that attitude can be taken to self-defeating extremes. And it's something that you don't see as much because it's not the extreme that most people suffer from. Most people probably could stand to have a little bit more of that in their lives. And that's, what we're used to hearing about with financial irresponsibility. But you can be irresponsible on the other side too, by focusing, too heavily on hoarding. Money is just a means to an end. Accumulating as much of it as possible is not the point. I mean, I heard a metaphor the other day that I thought was really fitting, that it's like if you were driving around from gas station to gas station, just trying to keep your tank as full as possible. It's like, well, that's not the point of the gas. The gas is supposed to get you from A to B. And if you're not allowing it to do that because you're too fixated on always having the fullest possible tank, you're totally missing the point. And so I think because I had finally gotten to the point where I could really, really comfortably afford it and felt really good about it, it didn't strike me, the same way that I thought it would. And I ended up feeling a lot better about it than I thought I was going to. Cause I was like, oh, this is so much money. Like I feel so guilty. But I think that, I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with Bill Perkins, but his die with zero mentality is kind of inspiring to me too. Just that, much of your wealth, you're probably going to, die and be giving away anyway. So there is something to be said for making sure that you're really in tune with, what you're spending on and that it makes you happy, and obviously living beneath your means, but everyone's means are different. So
I want my last check for $5 to bounce.
Yeah. I love that.
And that's to get me in the ground.
Yeah.
You were on your way, my friend, with the Cobra build. Well, Katie, you make some incredible points here, and actually, the die with zero mentality is a good one. I'd forgotten that was the author, but it's a great one because it talks about financial responsibility and being careful. But at some point, what are you going to do? And the analogy of the riding around to just top off your gas tank is so perfect. Not
Isn't
just
that great?
It's just beautiful. It's an automotively based podcast, and that makes sense to us. But I have long contended that money is just fuel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it just gets you places. You can go far, you can go fast, you can go both. You can go far and fast, and you will, of course, spend more money in that process. But there's something I think you mentioned also, which I think we all relate to, and we sort of joked about the irrational. And the reason you and I became friends through that email is irrationality loves company. That's what
I like that.
But the truth is, there's also something I think that registers sort of mentally within goal setting and within sort of like placing a discipline to yourself that you at one day, if it's exercising every single day and eating well every single day, well, eventually you're going to build muscle mass and lose weight, and you're going to be healthier and live longer and all these wonderful things. That's the result of a goal setter's mindset. And if yours was done financially toward the attainment of a goal, which happened to be an automobile and represented therein, so be it. I mean, I think that is like mental health to me, instead of punishing yourself relentlessly just to uphold what may or may not be considered on brand for financial analysis. I think it actually supports your brand to do what you preach and then get there.
Right. Well, thank you. Yeah. Well, the health analogy is a good one too, because I don't know if y'all are familiar with that guy. I think his name Brian Johnson. He's the guy that's trying to age in reverse. So he's spending like millions of dollars a year on like, blood transfusions. And he has this very strict regimen that he follows, like no alcohol, no sugar, no processed foods, no staying up past 8 p.m. I mean, he is like robotic, and I'm sure he is going to extend his life, but at what point does the payoff of having a longer life, pale in comparison to the things that you're having to give up in order to have it? Like, I think that is, even the health example can be taken to that extreme too, where I think for me, it just came down to, I'm proud of where I've gotten. I've gotten a lot farther than I ever thought I would, kind of in general, let alone for my age. And I was like, I want to celebrate everything that I've done and not just feel as though the only acceptable thing to do with the money I've earned is to put it in a brokerage account and stare at it on a screen. Like,
yeah, but the key is you're within your means. That's the key is,
Mhm.
you are within your means.
Yeah.
And, I was amazed to see that you said you were saving at 70%. That's just phenomenal.
Thank
But
you.
I strived early on. I never got to 70%, but,
Well, we
yeah,
don't have children.
yeah, that'll cost you. I can
Dual
tell you.
income, no kids.
Yeah,
We
that
got
delta
some
will adjust eventually.
business. Yes.
That's the fourth delta. Yeah.
But that's right. Like that, I have said this so much recently. Like, you got to make hay while the sun shines. We got to earn as much as we can and save a lot now. This obviously was not a savings choice. This was a splurge choice, but we do want to save as much as we can now, because we won't always be able to do this. We won't always have high incomes. We won't always have no dependents. And so I think that that's the other piece of this, is trying to find that balance though. And I think it was funny. My dad, he loves cars. And I was like really wringing my hands about, like, I just don't know, like, should I just go buy an RDX, or like, should I go buy a like more responsible, nice car? And I kind of was like breaking down the numbers. And my dad was like, this is a no-brainer. He was like, you need to go buy the Macan. And he was really sweet about it too. Cause I was even then trying to think of, okay, like, well, if I get the 2019, or if I maybe get this color, I can get it cheaper. I'm like trying to find all these ways to make it feel more reasonable. And he was like, if in the grand scheme of things, the like few $1,000s you're going to save by, giving up on those, settling for those things that are not what you want. He's like, yeah, that's not going to matter. Like, if you're going to buy the car, you need to buy the car that you want to get. So that was also kind of fun too, to have him as a partner in crime in that decision, because he was kind of egging me on too.
Yeah,
That's a beautiful summary, and clearly we need to have Dad on the show.
yeah, he sounds like another bad influence, like Steve-O and Adam. It's like I'm building a car and I'm going through the same thing. I'm like, I decided no, forget the legacy assets. I'm building this car the way I want it. And
I love it.
So the $8 light, I'm putting $67 light, because the $67 light looks better.
Mm-hmm.
So but that little, I'm done. I'm getting it the way I want it. So good for you.
Well, Katie, I tell you, you've been a joy to have on this show.
Oh, thank you.
I'm not kidding you. And more in the automotive way, I thought we might have just gone down the financial road, but you weaved it in beautifully with the automobiles, and as your non-dads, but joining your dad in a spiritual sort of a kumbaya. Yeah. We're proud of you.
Very proud of you.
My car dads.
Exactly.
I'm also very proud of you for being an Air Force spouse. To be the wife of anybody who serves in the military is a commitment.
Thank you.
And a sacrifice. And my support, my wife and my family. And I couldn't have done my career without her support. So hats off to you for being a military spouse and supporting your husband while he serves our country.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Well, and with that, I guess we will go ahead and wrap up. Absent our former host, Steve, wherever you are in the land of disconnected.
We miss you, Steve.
We did, buddy. Yeah, you'd have been a great contributor within this. But thank you always for your guidance, and thank you, Katie, for being our guest today. And to all the listeners and/or watchers, click like, subscribe, tell your friends, people you don't know, all about us. And you can find Katie all over the internet, but most commonly on Instagram at Money with Katie. And again, that's Katie, and also at moneywithkatie.com, on the Money with Katie show, and wherever you get your podcast. Thank you very much for being here, and we'll talk to you next week.